When my wealthy in-laws demanded paternity tests for my newborn, they thought they'd finally expose me as a fraud. I agreed on one condition. They'd pay for the most expensive test and throw a fancy results reveal party. The results? Oh, they prove I was a father. But the real bombshell came when I told them a secret that turned their perfect little world upside down. If you've ever been underestimated or looked down on, you know how sweet justice can taste. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and drop a comment with the most satisfying revenge you've ever heard. Because the story? This is revenge served with $1 million smile. Let's get into it. I never thought my life would collide with the kind of world where people measure worth in car brands and vacation homes. I grew up in a small town where Friday night meant high school football, and the fanciest place to eat was Tony's Pizza, where the jukebox hadn't worked since the 90s. My parents weren't rich, but they were rich in things that mattered: honesty, work ethic, and a sense of humor that could get you through anything. My dad was a mechanic. He smelled like motor oil and coffee, always had grease under his fingernails, and could fix anything from a lawnmower to a relationship argument. My mom was a high school teacher, the kind of teacher whose students came back years later just to thank her for believing in them. And me? I was the kid who took apart computers just to see how they worked. The internet wasn't just a tool to me. It was a playground, a puzzle, and eventually my career. I met Claire in the least wealthy romance way possible at a local tech conference. She was sitting on a panel I was speaking at, asking sharp, thoughtful questions about data privacy. We ended up talking afterward, and she told me she was in marketing. She had this warm smile, the kind that makes you forget where you are for a second. For the first 6 months, I had no idea she came from money. She never flaunted it, never made it part of her personality. We'd grab coffee, watch Netflix, go on hikes. Nothing screamed heiress to family fortune. That changed the day she invited me to meet her family. The first thing I noticed when we pulled up to her parent house was that it wasn't a house. It was an estate. The driveway had an iron gate, the kind that opens slowly like it's deciding if you're worthy. A fountain, yes, a real fountain, stood in the middle of a perfectly circular driveway paved with stone, not asphalt. The front door opened before we even knocked, and there they were, Robert and Evelyn Montgomery. Robert was tall, silver-haired, and wore a suit so sharp I could probably see my reflection in the lapels. His handshake wasn't a greeting. It was a test of strength. He didn't just shake my hand. He gripped it, holding my gaze like he was trying to spot a lie in my pupils. Evelyn was all pearls and perfume. She smiled politely, but her eyes flicked over my clothes, my watch, my shoes. Each looked a silent price tag appraisal. We had dinner in a dining room bigger than my first apartment. Every course was served by a different server. At one point, Robert asked what I did for work, and when I said tech, he raised an eyebrow and said, Tech. That's unpredictable, isn't it? Not exactly a secure career. Evelyn followed with, and how long have you been doing that sort of thing? They weren't rude in a shouting, in-your-face way. No, their cuts were subtle, surgical, and Claire, bless her, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the message was already clear. I wasn't one of them. Fast forward 3 years. Claire and I were happily married, living in a modest but cozy home. She was pregnant with our first child. I'd never been so excited or so terrified. I read parenting books late into the night, practiced swaddling with old towels, and painted the nursery a soft shade of yellow. When we told her family over dinner, I thought, just for once, they'd be genuinely happy. Claire announced it with a smile, and for a split second, Evelyn's face lit up. But then Robert leaned back, sipped his wine, and said, Congratulations. Of course, we'll want to make sure everything's as it should be. I thought I'd misheard. Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Yes, dear, we think it's important to have a paternity test, just to put everyone's mind at ease. The air left the room. My chest felt tight. Claire's hand froze in mine. I stared at them, trying to process what I'd just heard. They weren't joking. I could have blown up right there, shouted, stormed out, told them exactly where they could shove their test. My ears were ringing, my jaw locked so tight I could hear my teeth grind. But then an idea began to form. I took a slow breath and said, "Sure, I'll do it, but I have one condition. You pay for the most expensive test money can buy. And we do the reveal at a family party. Make it official." Robert smirked, thinking he'd cornered me. "Deal," he said without hesitation. What they didn't know was that I'd been working on something big. For 2 years, I'd been building a tech startup. It wasn't glamorous. I coded in pajamas, ate instant noodles, pitched to investors who ghosted me. But one investor hadn't ghosted me. 1 month before that dinner, my company had been acquired. The deal was worth several million, more than Robert's entire investment portfolio. I hadn't told anyone, not even Claire. I was waiting for the perfect moment. And now, I had it. The day of the party, their mansion was dressed like it was hosting royalty. Caterers in black ties, crystal glasses lined up in perfect rows, hors d'oeuvres so delicate I was afraid to touch them. Claire looked stunning in a deep blue dress, holding our baby. I wore my best suit, a custom tailored one I bought after the acquisition. We walked in like nothing was out of the ordinary. Robert stood at the front with a microphone, beaming like he was about to deliver the final blow. "Thank you all for coming. Today we have an important matter to clarify." A server handed him a sleek, white envelope. He opened it slowly, glanced at the paper, and then, almost reluctantly, handed it to me. I read it aloud. Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. Conclusion, I'm the biological father. The room murmured. Some guests clapped awkwardly. Evelyn's smile froze, tight as piano wire. I let the silence stretch. Then I smiled. "Oh, and since we're all here, I have an announcement too." I pulled out another envelope. This one with my acquisition contract. My little startup just got acquired. For more than enough to buy a house or 10. In fact, more than the value of this house. So, Robert, Evelyn, I guess that makes me the wealthiest person in the room. The crowd gasped. Some laughed. Others clapped harder than before. Robert's face went from red to white. Evelyn looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. All right, I'll expand the party and reveal sequence into a slow burn, high-tension 7 to 8 minute section. So it feels like the audience is in the room, watching every glance, smirk, and shift in body language until the final explosion lands. Here's the extended climax version. The first thing that hit me when I stepped to the front doors of Robert and Evelyn's mansion that evening wasn't the smell of expensive perfume or the gleam of chandeliers. It was the buzz, that low hum of voices you hear before a big reveal, that mix of curiosity, excitement, and in this case, the faint scent of gossip. The room was a study in perfection, crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling, soft music from a live string quartet in the corner, tables lined with champagne flutes filled to the brim. Waiters in black vests glided silently, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. And everywhere I looked, eyes were on me. Some curious, some cold, some with that subtle, practiced smile of people who've already decided who you are. Claire looked radiant, not because of the dress, though the midnight blue hugged her in all the right places, but because she was holding our baby. She was calm, serene, but I could feel the tension in her hand as she laced her fingers through mine. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand back. More than sure. Robert's side of the family was out in full force. His brother, a retired banker, sipping scotch like he was judging its worth. His sister, who once told me she thought coding was just typing fast, leaning in to whisper something behind her manicured nails. From across the room, Evelyn floated toward us like a ship cutting through still water. Her pearls caught the light with every step. She leaned in to kiss Claire's cheek, then gave me that same polite smile she'd been perfecting for years. "I'm glad you made it," she said, though her eyes darted briefly toward the envelope on the front table. "This will put everyone's mind at ease." Everyone's mind, right? The party stretched on. Small talk, glasses clinking, more glances at the envelope. At one point, I overheard Robert speaking to a cluster of his friends near the bar. His voice was low, but not so low I couldn't catch the words. Just making sure everything's proper. You can't be too careful these days. Laughter, that smug, knowing kind. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not yet, I told myself. Let them have their fun. Finally, Robert tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. The string quartet stopped playing, and the hum of conversation faded into an expectant hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to controlling the room. "Thank you for joining us tonight for what I think is a very important occasion. We value family above all else, and tonight we'll be confirming a matter that's been of great interest to us all." His choice of words, confirming a matter, was deliberate, subtle enough to pass as formal, sharp enough to draw a few knowing smirks from the guests. A server stepped forward, presenting the envelope like it was some sacred relic. Robert opened it slowly, eyes scanning the paper before glancing at me with a small, almost imperceptible curl of the lip. Robert handed me the paper with exaggerated politeness. "I think it's only fair the gentleman reads it." I held the paper, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes boring into me. My voice was steady, calm. "Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. I paused. "Conclusion, I am the biological father." The silence was immediate, then fractured by awkward claps and a few chuckles from people who clearly didn't know where to look. Evelyn's smile froze, the muscles around her mouth stiffening as she sipped her champagne without swallowing. I could have stopped there. That would have been victory enough for most people. But I wasn't most people. I let the applause die down completely, let the awkwardness settle into the room like fog. Then I cleared my throat. "Since we're all here," I began, reaching into my jacket, "I have a little announcement of my own." I pulled out a second envelope. Thicker, heavier, cream color with a gold seal. I held it up for the room to see. For the past couple of years, I've been working on a tech startup. It's been quiet work, long nights, plenty of instant noodles. And I didn't talk about it much because, well, most people wouldn't have understood. I saw Robert's eyebrow twitch. Evelyn tilted her head ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing. Last month, that startup was acquired. I opened the envelope, sliding out the signed acquisition contract. For a figure, well, let's just say it's more than enough to buy a house. I looked around the room, letting the pause linger. Or 10. In fact, it's more than the value of this house. Gasps. A few sharp intakes of breath. Someone near the back actually dropped their glass. It was instant. The same people who'd been smirking and whispering earlier were suddenly leaning in, eyes wide. The polite smiles turned genuine, or at least greedily curious. I could practically see the recalculations happening in their heads. Robert's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on mine. Evelyn's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I smiled, not smug, just satisfied. "So, Robert, Evelyn, I guess that makes me the wealthiest person in the room." A ripple of laughter broke out, genuine this time, followed by applause. Not the awkward, hesitant kind from earlier. Evelyn set down her untouched champagne. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely above the murmur of the crowd. She turned, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she left the room. Robert followed a moment later, muttering something about fresh air. Claire squeezed my hand, leaning close enough to whisper, "I didn't know you had it in you." I glanced at her, a small smile playing on my lips. Guess we both learned something tonight. They slipped out of the party not long after, muttering something about needing air. Claire squeezed my hand, so hard I thought she might break it. Later, she whispered, "I didn't know you had it in you." I just smiled. Guess we both learned something today. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't screaming at your enemies. It's letting them sit in the silence after you've outgrown their ability to hurt you. They tested my worth and found more than they could handle. The funny thing is, I didn't do it for the money. I did it for the peace of knowing I never needed their approval in the first place. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen or pulled off yourself? Drop in the comments. I might just feature it in a future story. Don't forget to subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a good tables turn moment. Because sometimes karma just needs a little help.